Good afternoon and welcome all to this session. We will discuss about a very concerning topic, particularly in the realm of environmental health, with three of our distinguished speakers. This session, entitled Post-Pandemic Landscape Architecture Now, will highlight the new normal of the post-pandemic world. As we all know, all countries had withdrawn their strategy. Likewise, the landscape industry is experiencing similar paradigm change and reforming to adapt new design solutions for common good. This session will touch some pertinent subjects, particularly in the crucial role of urban green spaces during the pandemic, issues and challenges that cities are facing during this crisis, trends emerging in urban city planning during the pandemic, how the urban environment can be designed to promote a healthy living environment for individuals, while minimizing the emergence and spread of future infectious disease and climate change along the way, of course. Our first speaker today is Associate Professor Dr. Shurin Abdul Shukur. He is an academician at the Department of Landscape Architecture, Faculty of Design and Architecture, University Putra Malaysia since 2001. She holds a PhD from University of Copenhagen, and her PhD research focuses on design of green outdoor environment at healthcare facilities. With that, I pass the session to her. Welcome, Dr. Shurin.
Hello, Dr. Salehuddin. Thank you for the introduction. Okay, with that, I will start my presentation. For the next 10 minutes, I will share with you on the crucial role of urban green spaces, especially concerning mental health disorder. And as we know, since last year, many of us has to work from home. And of course, many of us were having problems to access green spaces due to the SOP, or we have to do the social distancing. Yeah. And this presentation, I will discuss on two of my research which has been carried out. One is during MCO, the first MCO in March. Yeah, it's a survey conducted at 7 low-cost housing schemes in Kuala Lumpur. And the second study was on the usage of parks and urban green spaces during the third MCO. And the first is the first is on the study at the low-cost housing scheme. And I had carried out an in-depth telephone interview with residents from 7 low-cost housing projects in Kuala Lumpur. And this study was carried out because during the first lockdown, I was staying at home and I was enjoying my house, my spaces, my garden. Suddenly, I start to realize how does those living in low-cost flats are facing the lockdown. Therefore, and I read that about 36% of those being affected by mental health disorder are those living at low-cost flats. So therefore, I've decided to do this survey in order to identify how the residents at the low-cost flats are dealing with the lockdown last year. And the housing schemes that were involved can see that from Flat Keramat, which consists of 400 residents, up to PPA Sungai Rejang, which consists of 16,000 residents. And I've identified that the stress level of the residents there ranging between mostly on the higher side, between 7 to 10. And when I talked to them during the in-depth telephone interview, they have highlighted how the MCO have impacted their daily lives, because all the residents before this, during the MCO, they can come back at different time. They were in school, they were in, but during the lockdown, everybody are being crammed into one space, which is about 650 square feet. And one of the house that I talked to, there are about 18 people, consists of 3 generations living together. And they even said that the corridors were used for like rearing chickens, and and then the children have to do the online classes at the corridor. And these are some of the very sad. To me, it's a very sad images, but this is the hard truth that they are facing every day of their life. And you can't even see where is the living room, where is the kitchen, even the balcony offer a very little view outside. And one of the residents even have a children with disabilities. So for me, it's a very touching story when I hear from them. And they have some suggestions that at the end of the survey, they these are the suggestions many of them wanted, because they said that there's at least there's some balcony where they can do their activities and have a view outdoors. Yeah, so these are some of the suggestions. And the second survey that I did was during MCO, the third MCO, which is I would like to know what are the use, how they use, how people are using the parks before and after or during the MCO. So we did an online survey, and there's a total of 415 responses from all over Malaysia. And these we find out that, as expected, about half of them said they did not even visit the green spaces during the pandemic. And we can see that mostly who visited the parks within the less than 500 meter from where they are staying. And we can see 28% even say they did not do visit any parks at all. And we can see that even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a 61% saying that they like to visit during nighttime, maybe because of the weather. But we can see there's still a, quite a high number of those still prefer to visit it at nighttime during the pandemic. And mostly we can see that people are staying less than 30 minutes when the MCO was imposed. And we can see that those activities that they carried out before and during the MCO is about the same, mostly on the jogging, walking, and etc. And of course, this is very interesting when they say that during the pandemic, they say that when they visit the green spaces, their stress level, they can lower the stress level. Yeah. So this is what the respondents has listed out, that they would like to see the design improvement in the urban green spaces after the COVID-19. You can see that the highest is the sanitization facilities, and the least was smaller urban green spaces. This is due because we can see that because they need bigger spaces for them to do their daily activities. And we can see from this, the suggestions is that they would like to see more greeneries. And it's very interesting when they say that they want the park as a mean to distribute information to the public, because when they go there, they would like to know what is the latest information, maybe about the pandemic and everything. Yeah. And this is when they mentioned just now from the first survey, when they said, and also from the second survey, the facilities in the park, they would like to see the sanitization facilities, such as we come up with some proposal. And also we can see that there's a park dots. Maybe we can do something like this, that people can be reminded to keep their distance when they are enjoying the green spaces. Yeah. And of course, as we can see from the proposal or preferences of the respondents, they wanted a bigger urban space for activities that they feel that they can carry their whatever they want, the activities, the jogging or walking in the groups, that they have the space without feeling they feeling that they are being violations of the SOP and everything. So basically these are what the two survey that I did, that we have identified. With that, thank you very much. So I pass back to Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Shurin. That was a very interesting subject on mental health, human behavior, and the role of urban green space. We'll talk about that soon, okay, in the question and answer session. Now, let's move to the second speaker. She is landscape architect Juwita Wan Hashim, founder and director of Verona Design, a corporate member of Institute of Landscape Architect Malaysia, ILAM, an ILAM Past Council member, a jury member of International Federation of Landscape Architect 2020 Design Competition, and recipient of the Young Landscape Architect Award in 2016. Now, I pass the session to Landscape Architect Juwita. Please welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. First and foremost, I would like to thank you, the organizer, for inviting me to give some talks in this forum. My name is Landscape Architect Juwita Wan Hashim, and I'm from Verona Design Berhad. And actually, I'm going to present you extractions of my master's dissertations. I just completed my studies, part-time studies, master's in UPM, and this is the outcome of my dissertation. So during pandemic crisis, quarantine restrictions are said to generate panic among the city dwellers, and common emotional response were fear of contagion, depression, loneliness, boredom, isolations, uncertainty, frustration, and fear, which actually cause stress and anxiety, which all these factors affects the mental health, which the effects are much more longer than the physical impact itself. Other than that, we discovered that there is a closure of public parks to avoid overcrowding parks, because of proper guidelines and SOP compliance. And there is a lot of debates going on in between the politicians and the local authorities, which they are urging the local governments to open the parks, because it was a place where people can go out and take a break and take a fresh air. But there is some issues where park cannot be open during pandemic. Okay, according to National Recreations and Parks Associations in 2020, urban parks are generally recognized as a valuable public assets, particularly during health emergencies. And during my studies, I have discovered 6 major benefits of urban park for human populations. Number one is maintaining physical activity. As we know that we need to be very healthy, we need to be urban park will provide a place for us to go exercise, to go for physical activities. We'll be able to engage with the physical activities, which actually can prevent the harm caused by the COVID-19. And number two, mental and health wellness. And psychologists has recognized that by simply looking at the nature, everything will be manageable. Everything in the life will be manageable, and maintaining contact with nature during COVID-19 and lockdown was observed to lower the risk of reporting symptoms of despair and anxiety. Number three is reducing stress due to usage electronic device use. As we know that during the pandemic, we have been communicating and we have been using a lot of electronic gadgets to communicate and interact with outsiders, with our clients. So urban public parks actually can provide a recovery from mental exhaustion, stress, and negative mood. Number four, increase social cohesion and reducing the risk of disease transmission, because parks are substantial. We can spread out in the parks, and it will be very crucial to open the park, because if we limit the access going to the park, people might be migrate to congested places or less desirable spaces. If the access public park is restricted, it will be more dangerous on the transmission of the disease. Number five, reduce air pollutions. According to a separate analysis done by the Italian scientists during the COVID-19 outbreak, the high death rates of people with COVID-19 located at the country's north area, which are linked to very high levels of air pollutions, which we can see that COVID-19 and air pollutions are deadly connections and very dangerous cocktail. So as we know that air pollution, we know that urban parks can reduce temperature, function as a carbon sequestrations, and also removal of air pollutants. We know that the the trees can be able to absorb the carbon dioxide outside. And lastly, urban parks are resilient for emergency purposes. Urban parks are vital characteristic of a resilient city because the space are very flexible and be able to be converted for emergency health purposes. This can be seen in March 2020, where an emergency field hospital was established in Central Park in New York City to cater people sickness of people in COVID-19. So a sustainable strategy to create an emergency facilities is called an adaptive reuse approach, which can be which the parks can be turned into emergency purposes. So these are the surveys that I have done to the publics. I think around 171 respondents using a questionnaire online surveys, where most of them agreed that the reasons they go into the park is critical during pandemic is because majority was agreed on the therapeutically affect the mood for happiness and psychological well-being to relieve the social isolations, stress reductions, and also to stay physically fit and healthy and avoid the damage by the COVID-19 diseases. So they know that greenery is very crucial during pandemics. I reckon that cities that connect people and nature are post-pandemic cities because during the pandemic, during the crisis, during the MCO, we are trapped indoors and in confined spaces and we are not be able to go out. And there is a need for reachable open spaces and it has been increased. So I think urban public parks may play a important role on how people will deal with the ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I have studies about the changes and trends in urban cities planning during COVID-19 pandemic. Number one is the rise of 15-minute city, or we call it as a life in more local, where the actually concepts adopted in Paris by Paris Mayor and Anne Hidalgo, influenced by urbanist Carlos Moreno, where the concept describes in city which residents will live within a short walk or bike ride on all their daily needs. Everything is reachable between 15 minutes and it is become more popular with the increasing demand for flexible remote life. So everything you need is within 15 minutes in the city. Either you want to go to work, you want to go to the parks, urban spaces, hospitals, retails, and Paris Mayor actually adopted this concept and wants every street to have a cycle lane by 2024. And she proposed to remove 60,000 on street parking spots and replace them with the green spaces and playground instead. So you know that because the streets is everything is bikeable and walkable, so the streets can turn into spaces of carbon-free mobility, which the benefits can eliminate pollution, improve health by promoting mobility, increase local consumption, and reduce number of vehicles, which will create safer streets. And there's a lot of countries have been enticed by this concept. For instance, Melbourne, Ottawa, Milan, Seattle, and Madrid, where they have intention to follow with the concept. Number two is a fewer cars, more cycling and walking. And we know that a lesson learned during the pandemic is need to have a very good, strong network of bicycle and pedestrian friendly streets because people are very cautious to take a public transport during a pandemic because they worry on the transmission of the disease. So there are a few countries which give initiatives on the cycling network, which they have improvised the cycling network in the city. For instance, Bogota, Colombia, they converted 100-kilometer city streets into bike lanes. Berlin, Germany used yellow tape to expand the bike lanes. Mexico City is where they put the triple network of cycle lanes, and also Vancouver, Canada, which vehicles are no longer allowed, so people have more space to exercise. So these are all the pictures, the initiative that have been done by the countries all over the world. So these are some of the temporary services, urban services that emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic. These are all the temporary infrastructure change, and they started to implement it in March 2020. So another emerging trends are urban streetscape or parklets, where actually the reasons are where it been implemented is to support the retails or local business, where the several countries have decided to extend the sidewalk and they have switched the parking spots and lots of pedestrian zones in the hot basics and turn it into parklets, which is actually a parking spaces turned into a miniature public areas, which is often located near to the sidewalk. And The term parklet was first used in San Francisco City to represent the conversion of an automobile parking space into a mini park for passive recreation. So countries which have been used this concept are Italy, Kansas City, Missouri, Birmingham, England, and also Newcastle. Modular design. As we know that an excellent approach for dealing with pandemics and natural disasters, as well as constructing buildings, are less expensive and more quickly to construct, which is availability of modular construction materials for the constructions of immediate medical care facilities, for instance, hospitals and ICU, has been identified as a potential necessity for pandemic planning. And cities can use modular facilities to confine patients recovering from pandemic disease by quickly constructing, modifying, and dismantling them. This can be seen at the picture of the temporary hospital in China and New York in this slide. And this concept inspired designer to produce a self-contained design which can segregate and protect against infection, where they have some barrier to prevent the spread of the diseases, and adaptable, versatile modular furniture. Which can support a flexible multifunction space and allow a variety of purposes. And this is due to the demand during the pandemic. And in the response of increased need for bicycle parking, Polish company Bike2Box launched a modular bicycle parking box, which transformed a standard car parking into a local accommodating 12 bicycles, which is very easy to construct and dismantle the unit. Another things that have been to arise is digital transformations, the rise of artificial intelligence and touchless technologies, which leading to emergence of creative urban planning models like the smart city concept, which is founded on the success of digital resolution. And other than that, urban farming for self-sufficient communities and increased food security and nutrition in the cities. And this is the diagram that shown some of the possible actions that could be addressed to ensure the safer levels of social separations inside the urban parks, which I have highlighted a few points. For instance, increase the width of the sidewalks and streets, increase the width of the parks walkways, provide one-way circulations of movement, remove the obstructions, for instance, planters and apply markings, and also use street furniture for signs, increase access and additional cleaning and maintenance to ensure that parks are in very good management system. So the antivirus built environment, I have identified 9 antivirus built environment based on my research. Number 1, determine the inclusions of urban green spaces in the city, where I believe that we need to prioritize the neighborhood. We need to have urban public parks. We need to determine areas which is lacking on the urban public parks to ensure the individuals, regardless where they live, have a very good access to the good urban public parks. And I believe that green space planning guidelines need to be revamped, whether the 10% percentage overall development maybe need to be reconsidered and emphasized whether it is enough to cater for the communities or not. And I think we need to set a national criteria for the quality, and accessibility of urban parks, as well as equity measures to ensure that the needs of local communities are met, and allocate funds and resources in creations of more urban parks in the cities. Number 2, city connectivity, going back to the 15-minute city. And I think to improve the livability and resilience of urban environment and promote sustainability and social and economic elements, we need to we need to follow the 15-minute city concept, where the components are like increased pedestrian walkway, bike lanes, green spaces, while reducing road spaces, encourage multifunctional buildings as opposed to single-purpose commercial buildings, expand and improve public transit, and encourage a seamless, healthy mix of homes, businesses, and public spaces in neighborhoods. Number 3, focusing on smart growth and innovative concept. It is actually incorporating greenways into transportation corridors and providing access to informal greenscape, revegetated abandoned areas are needed in addition to create of new urban parks. As we can see that Highline New York is actually built on a long abandoned railway in Chelsea, New York, and this park has become a green lung in the city. It has become a very famous parks in New York City, same as the Shanghai Houghton Park, which the parks is actually using a regenerative design concept. The parks are originated from a garbage dump, and now it turns into a luxurious park in the China. So maybe we have to retrofit the urban environments to enhance the multifunctional of urban park and to enhance the green spaces in the city. So these are all surveys that I did on the potential creations of healthy design environment that can be resilient towards pandemic. And based on the survey, you can see that most of people are preferred to be that we or local council authorities, maybe we need to retrofit the abandoned spaces and convert them to the new urban parks to cater more green area than in the city so that the green area is sufficient and can be accessible to the public. Number four, smart cities and citywide digital transformations. And the usage of IoT systems allow massive and systematic data collections. And as we know that during pandemic, there is an issues of overcrowding parks where some of people not be able to go to the park. The parks have been closed. So I suggest the urban park application can be developed in Malaysia to display the numbers of visitors for each park. And e-booking system and online registration can be utilized to support effective capacity management of public spaces. And at the same time, this allow visitors to schedule their visit to avoid big crowd in the parks. And we will effectively plan our journey. If let's say we know that the parks are crowded, we don't have to go there because it's already been recorded in the application. So it is very organized, and it will give information of the numbers of the visitors on the parks, which will limit the density of users at specific times. So this is a application developed by National Recreation and Park Association in USA, where actually they give information to the public to find activities, to locate the parks nearby, and maybe to read about the parks, what's the facilities being provided, and we is always is all in the fingertip, and is we are be able to find the parks that we wanted or we intend to go in the city. So number five is generous terraces, balconies, and private gardens. As we know that these are all important elements that we can design to give a greater natural light and improve ventilations so that we have more available open spaces to prevent the spread of infectious and diseases. Number six, develop a smart mobility network by providing a digital info LED board, digital informations, provide QR code for scanning, for SOP guidelines or park surveillance and announcement system to be provided to ensure that SOP and social distancing can be monitored by the park management from time to time. Number seven, incorporating health demands and impacts into the conceptualizations, where I believe that design and planning of infrastructure project could help policymakers, planners, and built environment experts create more sustainable communities in the future. For example, if a pandemic occurs again, maybe we can determine where urban parks area that can be utilized in the future to build a temporary hospitals. So it is more, I think it is more safer because it is outside space and it is not a confined spaces, and it is safer. And maybe we this can be done by improved collaboration between public health and planning professionals so that the health can be properly integrated into our future development plans. Number eight, establish proper SOP guidelines by the local authorities, because SOP guidelines, there is no standardized SOP guidelines have been done. Everything's been done by the own management park system. I think the governments or local council need to standardize it, or maybe do a proper plannings or training to the park managers to ensure that everything's when the park is open, it is based on the proper SOP guidelines. And lastly, strengthen blue-green network. We know that this virus, going back to the disease, actually it is originated from zoonosis diseases. It is from the bat. So the virus comes from the bat. So fast urbanizations may result in encroachment into natural areas and closer contacts with wildlife zoonosis. So I reckon that blue-green networks have help to buffer interactions between humans and wild and domestic animals, and we need to prevent deforestation and biodiversity loss. which will reduce human-wildlife contact and hence zoonotic diseases transmissions. And we need also to provide more holistic resource management, pollution reductions, and increased area for habitat and biodiversity preservation through the establishments of urban growth boundaries. It should be prioritized to prevent the new diseases in the future. So lastly, maintaining or increasing space for nature cities and keeping it accessible to the public should be part of the sustainability agenda to go towards SDG 3, SDG 13, and SDG 11, with having a proper quantitative and qualitative indicator to push the boundaries and go beyond implementing the sustainability development in Malaysia. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Landscape Architect Juwita. I think a new perspective on pandemic reshaping design solution. We'll talk about that subject soon. Now, let's move to the final speaker. He is Landscape Architect Alfred Lee, the Director of STX Landscape Architect. He is an accredited landscape architect of the Singapore Institute of Landscape Architects, SILA, a corporate member of Institute of Landscape Architect Malaysia, ILAM, and a registered ABC water professional with the Institution of Engineers Singapore, IES. I now pass the session to Landscape Architect Alfred. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Salihuddin, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alfred. I am a director at STX Landscape Architects in Singapore. And today I'm going to share with you my personal thoughts on the landscape architecture practices like post-pandemic. And so the big question is always like why landscape is actually reforming. So just a little bit of background. So this shift in landscape, the direction is actually started since like 7 to 8 years ago. So it's very simple. So you can tell from the different themes, topics, and trends in conferences, seminars, and like competitions that you are attending or you may come to heard about. And this shouldn't come as a surprise because like as technology advances and we talk about internets of things and you are getting like easier access like to knowledge database. So this thing happened. So to put this like into a very layman term, so landscape nowadays, there are a lot more science, technology, slightly less about art anymore. So I remember that when I was like a young landscape architect, started back in 2004. So it's the other way around. So landscape industry is a lot more art and like science and technology actually comes second. And of course, like, this entire shift in like the landscape trend is like being hastened by two main events that's like happening around the world. So one of them is like, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic that's like still ongoing and with a lot of countries that's like already treating them as an endemic. And the second one, of course, is like global warming. So if you just heard about like the latest like UN address, like it's been talking about like, there's like already like a 1 degree change in average like global weather in the past, like since like 1800. So so it's actually a very serious like thing that we should actually consider and think about. And of course, like these two main events hasten the process and then subsequently change the way we live, work, and play. So things are getting a little bit more like decentralized because like, because of COVID, and we can't really like move about that freely between like countries with different borders. So you could see that like things are a lot more decentralized and they are regionalized as well. And of course, like home-based learning, working from home is nothing new to everyone anymore. So I could imagine that all of you can relate to this like very dearly. And apart from that, like, like because of like all these things, so like, the reformation become like faster and faster. So we talk about like, the need of like a bigger home, the need of like a bigger houses because like a lot more people are working from home, kids are staying home and they are doing their home-based learning. So there's a change in the housing trend as well. And not only that, you could see that there's like a big change in the employment trend. So we just like take a look into like big countries such as like India or like even in Malaysia itself. So like people are not talking about like working from home as in you work from home in a city area, but it's more like people are returning to their hometown and then they start working from home there. And aside from that, on the right-hand side, you could see a news article that talks about the workers shortages across all the Southeast Asia industry. So this is real, and because like of the movement control, people wouldn't be able to go get in and out of the country easily, involve like very high costs of like being quarantined, and to actually like for some of the employer to actually bear the cost is actually quite high on their end, and that's why there's like this issue. So aside from that, you could also see like a big changes in the business trend as well. So like as things like getting like decentralized and regionalized, like a lot of like shopping malls like in the city area, CBD area, they couldn't survive anymore. But like those businesses and commercial spaces in the heartland, they are thriving. And on the right hand side is actually a graph showing like how the demand actually fallen for all the commercial spaces in the CBD area. But on the other hand, it's actually risen for all the places that's like in the suburban area. And aside from that, there is like a very great demand of, like people start to crave nature and greenery, because like, most of the time they will actually spend at home dealing with their work or dealing with their kids. And because of pandemic, they couldn't really go around like freely. So like the needs and demand to connect to nature and greenery become more. So this is also one of the things that really hastened the entire process of like this reformation in the landscape architecture trend. So I'll just give you a little bit of background myself. I born and raised, and I studied in Malaysia most of my time, but I started working, practicing in Singapore since I graduated. So my experience and my the thing that I could share with you today is actually more relevant to the things that I see here over in Singapore. But I would say that like there are going to be like quite a bit of like similarity that you could see, and I hope that you can also relate to it, and you are able to actually see some of the things that are going on, and maybe picked up some of them along the way, and think about this. And of course, in Singapore, I'm focusing on these four resources, and these four like topics is actually quite relevant to the landscape architecture industry, and I will share with you why. So as you know that Singapore is actually a very compact and small country, so we are very high density, and so this four item then is really important, and the scarcity of resources is real. So if we look at the first thing being the greenery, so like things that you could start seeing changes is like in Singapore we have something that called the landscape replacement program. So what it means is that for some strategic planning areas, so there's like a 1-to-1 replacement of the landscape area. So meaning that if your building is actually like taking out 1 meter squared of like green spaces like from the land, so we have to put back that 1 square meter of like land with like greenery. So there's like a 1-to-1 replacement. So even with that, the urban planners, they are now looking at whether or not they could actually increase the ratio to 1:1.2, and to also further expand the so-called the strategic planning area to across like some of like the wider part of like Singapore. So it won't just like happen in the strategic planning area anymore. So then we also talk about, we have like things like a tree conservation area. So trees that's like above like the girth of 1.1 meter, we couldn't like just cut them without any permission. So like maybe like that kind of like restriction will be stringent like even further. So there are always like like this discussion going on that's like talk about some changes in those policy as well. So talk about green program as well. Some of the green program that's available in Singapore is like things like green mark, leaf certification, skyrise greenery, and this is actually something very similar to the green building index in Malaysia. So in Singapore, so recently there's like this talk about whether or not like making some of these like certification actually mandatory, and there will also be a need to actually review some of this certification as well. For example, if you take for the green building index in Malaysia for as an example, so like a lot of like the weightage of the points actually being awarded to architecture and engineering. So like with all this thing that's like going on, I won't be surprised to see a change in the weightage given to the greenery, which is the landscape. And this is really just to respond to the things that's like happened and all the researchers that's like being done, and then knowing that greenery is actually like part of the very important thing in our daily life. And the last part is actually like any like conservation and preservation like strategies and policies that's like existing in all the different countries. Urban planners like from all over the world, they are reviewing their own policies and guidelines now. So we could actually like expect a lot more like changes in this policy to actually respond to the matters that we have in hand. And of course, the other like resources that's like in threat in Singapore is of the about water. So water is actually there's a scarcity in water in Malaysia in Singapore. So as everyone know, that there is like a water agreement between Singapore and Malaysia. So that water that's like imported from Malaysia, they are about 20 to 30% of the current water consumption in Singapore. So it actually comes from that. So Singapore government, they are thinking about like boosting their own resources and make sure that by the year 2061, they don't need to rely on the water that's like coming from Malaysia anymore. Because of that, there would actually be subsequently some changes to some of the policy. And of course, like we talk about like handling like responding to the climate change and also rise in like sea level. So like whether or not then some of the policies such as like landscape sensitive urban design or like any program that's related to it will then become like part of like the urban planning and also like part of the development. And so we are talking about like things like integrating uh, constructed wetland, integrating like rain gardens into the development. And we wouldn't know and eventually whether or not like this will actually then become a mandatory requirement and as to handle like flash flood in urban area. And on the front that's related to manpower, so in Singapore, there's like a heavy reliance on like foreign workers and foreign talent. So just to give you an idea, like in Singapore, half of the population is actually non-Singaporean. So that says like how much like Singapore rely on foreign workers and foreign talent. So even though like this doesn't seem like a issue that we have in hand or like it's like facing Malaysian, but in Malaysian there's also a heavy reliance on labor workforce from other country and not from Malaysia itself. So I won't be surprised to see like changes in hiring policy and then the hasten of the process of digitalization of the industry. So to shorten both time and manpower constraint. So in that, I foresee that there's going to be a lot of this digitalization heading towards more adoption in artificial intelligence, automation, autonomous will become a lot more popular. We're talking about robotic and also the pre-finished precast volumetric construction, PVVC will also become like more popular to overcome manpower shortages. So we are talking about like, off-site build the houses like in precast, pre-finished method using robotic technologies, and then you just basically assemble the houses at site. This is actually really to overcome like both time and also like the manpower constraint. And the last part of the four things that I mentioned just now, the other part is actually food security. So Singapore is actually a very small island. Their main economic income is actually on trades and less about like producing food. So then you could see that 90% of the nutritional needs is actually from all over the world. So they know that this is going to be an issue when the next pandemic hit, because like if you're over reliant on what you can actually get from the outside and not thinking about how you can actually get the food from the inside, you're going to have issue when the next pandemic hit, because if the movement restriction is always there, it's actually not easy to actually bring things in and out of the country. So they have set up this like 30 by 30 mission. So they wanted to actually make sure that by the year 2030, they are able to actually supply themselves like 30% of the nutritional needs. And we also talk about like things like urban farming. It's like a growing trend in Singapore that's like really getting a lot of traction, and the government is also very supportive of that. And of course, like we are also looking at things like community farming, even looking at things like the home farming. So like this is actually an article that talks about the food security issue and the 30 and 30 mission. And this article basically shows that the Singapore government is actually wasting no time in helping the local to actually set up like more places that they could actually do like farming and using technologies, and even like with places that's like with space constraint. And their idea is actually to just make sure that they could expedite the entire process and become a lot more reliance and resilience in terms of like the food security. And this article basically talk about how they can actually utilize some of the multi-level car park at the public housing, and then to actually build in all this like community-based urban farming. And of course, then we also look at things like such as like smart indoor farm. So there are cabinets that like you could also look at purchase and then put at your home. So what you eventually need to do is actually just to put in the seeds and then like and plug in the water and then like plug in the electricity and put in some fertilizer, and things will actually just self-sustain by itself, and they can actually you are able to actually harvest the vegetable at the end of the day. And so one of the ideas is actually really to cut down the carbon footprint. So if you could imagine that like the more traditional method is that if you have like imported like vegetable from Cameron Highlands, so you could imagine that from the farm to actually go to a distribution center, from the distribution center to actually go to another distribution center in Singapore, and from the distribution in Singapore and to go to all the retailers and go to the home. So you could imagine the amount of like carbon trails that leaving behind is actually not very good for the environment. So about like cutting down the short time, you could actually get more fresh food and then cut down the carbon footprint. So this is actually something really good for the environment. So lastly, so what we can really do to contribute in combating future pandemic and calamity. So we have to keep up with the technology. So we are talking about all this thing and even robotics. So we have to do a lot more research and reading. So without this, like it's actually very difficult for us to actually get ahead of time because things are moving very rapidly and very quickly. So then the second part is actually really talk to like experts across a wide range of different disciplines. So don't just like talk to people that's like within our own industry. So the world is actually a lot more open and wider now. So we have to talk to people like the ecologists, the botanists, the biologists, the psychologists to understand what's actually at stake and then what we can actually integrate and help. And as a business owner, you can also like support and encourage your staff in attending classes, in all the relevant training program, and either giving them financial aids or give them a paid leave. And lastly, you can actually make it a mantra and the core business, core value of your business, like talking about like sustainability in design. So you could actually set up like design checklists, ask yourself whether or not you have done enough for the environment. You have done something that's like adaptable, flexible, whether the thing was pandemic proof, future proof, and resilience. So those are the very important thing. And the other thing is actually to really walk the talk and not just to talk the talk. And lastly, stay safe, stay healthy, stay positive, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Landscape Architect Alfred. Very interesting insight on redressing scarcity of resource via technology, business value chain, interdisciplinary profession, and core value. We'll talk about that in the next session. Now, we have arrived at the second session, the question and answer session. And previously, we have highlighted the new normal that we must embrace and its measure, as well as the way forward to apply it. Seems like we have developed a new narrative of environmental health through landscape architecture, and information is deemed necessary. Just now, we have listened three speakers talking about different topics. Dr. Shurin talked about the behavior of low-cost housing and also the need of redesigning urban green spaces in that vicinity. Landscape architect Juwita talked about the design strategy that we could propose to come about and redressing the issues of design solution in green spaces, particularly in the pandemic era. And also landscape architect Alfred talked about what are the way forward for businesses and also local people to actually come across with this situation that we are in. But first, I think I would like to ask a question to Dr. Shurin about a very interesting subject on mental health, human behavior, and the role of urban green space. I think the first question for your presentation, you have highlighted about the cramped situation in low-cost housing flat where they are actually really impacted with the situation of COVID-19. How can we change that actually?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saluddin, for the question. You know what, when I was doing this study, I did my literature search and everything. I was surprised to find out that there has been many papers, theses been written about this problem, even before the pandemic. So therefore, people has been talking about the problem years before, So I really hope that these kind of findings, like my study, can be highlighted in a webinar such as this, because otherwise we'll be keep on repeating the cycle, and nothing has been done. And things like, when we talk about cramped living spaces and how to improve their mental health, the size has been highlighted. It's too small, and the residents has said, at least 1,000 square feet. They said it's too small to contain their family members. And another thing that can be done in order to improve their living condition was that the residents said that when others or the authority did the survey, they did not really identify how many people actually living in the E flat. So they have to get real how many children they have. It's not 3 or 4. Some of them even have 8 children. And these are the actual facts that the authorities have to identify and really put into practice. And another thing that I would like to highlight is that when I mentioned in my presentation just now, the need for a view outdoor. We know that in the study of therapeutic landscape or restorative landscape, we know that even when you are not able to be outdoor or enjoy the green, you see, you touch the smell and everything, even while viewing green surrounding, it can reduce your stress, lower down your blood pressure. So I think having a balcony, I think like Alfred said just now about community-based urban farming, smart indoor farms. I think we have a lot to learn from Singapore, from what Alfred have stated. I'm so impressed, and then I hope my high hopes that after this webinar we will start to look at what Singapore has done when talking about living in flats. That's my take on for the question. Thank you.
So I think we can learn a lot from Singapore and how they deal with the situation,
That's right.
because in a compact country, I would say, and also we need to really dwell in conflict management. We really need to see how actually people lived in the cramped situation, and how they actually view green spaces, and that bring to the second question, Dr. Shurin. So we have allocation for green spaces at most of the low-cost house flat that we have in Malaysia. How are these spaces being used during pandemic?
When I interview them, the residents at the low cost flats, I mean, we as a designer, sometimes we heard, okay, there's an allocation of green spaces, they have parkings, but that's not the actual situation at the PPR or low cost flats. When the last time before the pandemic, people are not coming back at the same time. In the morning, some of them went to work, went to school, but when you are in a lockdown, everybody will forced to park at the parking spaces. And I was very sad to hear that, all even the green spaces has been sacrificed for them to put cars, motorcycles. And when they are in the lockdown, they said we don't have any green spaces to go down from the flats of 70, the level 17, to come down and enjoy, because everything been used by the parking area. And I hope again the authorities would really put their foot down about this problem of sacrificing the green spaces for cars. Maybe put a limit to each of the residents. You wouldn't know. I mean, you can't imagine what type of cars, how many cars each resident would have. So that's another thing that I found out from my survey. And also, I think I would like to point out what Juwita said about the 15 minutes green spaces. I think that will help a lot with when you are in a lockdown and you are living in a high flats area, and then they should be able to go outside and walk within less than 500 meters to enjoy the green spaces. I think that's something that has to be changed, especially at low cost flats. Yeah.
So definitely we can learn from what landscape architect Juita mentioned about the design strategy that we could propose to the local authority, and how can landscape architect deal with this situation. But basically,
Yeah.
how the green spaces being used in this area is particularly becoming car parks or transportation space to cater within this all transportation what, that they have in that area. All right,
We can say
but
that's
if
the ugly truth. That's the ugly truth at low cost flats. That's the real situation. Yeah.
so if let's say we provide more green spaces in this area, and they come down and enjoy that space, how can we actually as designer play our role in making sure that user does not abuse and we don't overlook or ignore the imposed standard operating procedure?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because when now we can start to cross the states, we can go back to our hometown, cross the state, and everything. We can see that people have start to forget about the SOP. Some of them you can even see with the mask lowered, and then they're bringing kids without any mask. So I'm very very sad to see that, especially in the mall. So again, when we talk about green spaces, what the designer can do is that, as you remember my presentation just now, one of the um, suggestions by the respondents, they said they wanted an area where they can go and sanitize their hands. So meaning that when you go to a park or green spaces, when you see all this location of the sanitization area, you will make them aware or remember that, okay, we are still not out of the wood yet. We still have to keep on sanitize our hand, keep our mask on, and then so these are the roles that designers can play to remind the public about the keeping our SOP and keeping our hygiene when we are in a park.
So basically,
Yeah,
we need to inject some of these hygiene spaces to ensure that people remind themselves that they need to practice the standard operating procedure during
that's
the
right.
pandemic in open spaces. All right.
That's
So
right.
I think good proposal that we can put forward to a local authority, and also how can we do this in design, proposing our design solutions. Okay. So let's move to landscape architect Juta. I think in your presentation you mentioned a lot about new perspective on pandemic and reshaping design solution. You put forward 9 new strategy, right? And I think that is very good. But you mentioned also some of the parks might have to close during pandemic because of overcrowding and non-compliant to SOP. What do you think some of the adaptive measures or latest park management criteria and planning for park managers, which could be done to deal with this pandemic and prevent the disease from spreading?
Okay, I think KLCC Park has one of the best good management, SOP management. I went to KLCC Park during MCO after the park have been open. So I think the park has been one of the best. So I think what you should do is to limit the access node for better management. So means that you have to close you have to just limit one entrance to go inside the park, and there should be a people to monitor ins and outs um, at the entrance area. And you need to establish a one-way mobility circulations to improve the management of crowded urban park. Because once you have this one-way movement of pedestrians, you can extend the width of the jogging track from maybe 1 meter or 1.5. You can extend it to 2 meter to 2.5. 2.5. So it's just a one-way mobility circulation, and it's going to be safe because we are we have the social distancing between one people to another. And I think as you know that before you enter the park, you need to have a checkpoint allocation. I think that's very normal, where you have to check the temperature, ask people to wear a mask. But you know, like KLCC, they calculated people inside the park. They have a limit. Maximum people to be inside the park is only 150. So if let's say the park has increased the maximum capacity 150, so you have to wait until someone's go out from the park, then only you can enter. So I think that's one of the procedure that can be done. But if you do like this, of course, there's a lot of people have to wait to enter the park. That's why I have highlighted that we have to increase open spaces and greenery, because I think we are still lacking on the green area or open spaces in the city. So other than that, I think you have to, as usual, we have to regularly monitor and restrict certain activities, close the playgrounds area, and maybe provide more flexible spaces for the kids. I mean, if let's say you want to bring kids, for the kids to play, you know, just like open green area, open space area for the kids to play and bring their scooter or cycle, and regular disinfections. That's very important. And washroom care, because washroom is very important, and provide hand sanitizer like what Dr. Shurin mentioned, hand washing stations, trash containers for the mask. So I think that's very important. And since you have to increase enforcement, the park managers have to hire more staff to monitor people inside the park to ensure that the SOP guidelines is complied. So you have no choice, but the park managers have to spend more to increase enforcement, to implement the health orders about physical separation measures. Yeah, that's all.
So we need to detail out the regulation, the design guideline, and also the enforcement.
Yes, I think the governments have to come out with the proper guidelines, SOP, and procedure, and they have to distribute it to all park managers. It's not like we are producing our own guideline. It have to be a very standard guidelines, which is very safe to use, and you have to comply. You know, like maybe provide training. You can provide training for them and comply based on one guidelines. Yes, to ensure that the park is safe. Yeah.
So we need a balance, design guidelines, regulation, and enforcement, not just for inside building, but also in landscape area, in
Yes,
open
urban
spaces.
green spaces. Yeah.
So my second question, I think within you put forward 9 proposal or criteria for healthy landscape design environment. You might
Yeah.
highlight one of the most significant measures that need to be prioritized by government bodies from now on.
Okay. I think it's very important to build a resilient, healthy environment to prevent the spread of infectious diseases. And looking at this pandemic, it may transform the types, sizes, and distribution of urban parks that we desire, as well as our perceptions of what the urban parks can provide to us. So, you know that looking back to the history, actually, pandemics, outbreaks, and European have affected urban redevelopment, and urban public parks and green spaces facilities can be seen as a result of cities planning responses to earlier crises and pandemics. You know, like the existence of Central Park by Frederick Law Olmsted. Exists after the yellow fever and cholera pandemic. It created because there is a demand by the public to have a urban public park that give plenty of fresh air and natural lights in the city. Same as Paris, where the Braun horsemen have been asked by Napoleon III to revamp and transform Paris into the modern city of lights after the same outbreak, after the cholera outbreak, where Braun horsemen have created a wider plaza and streets in the city of Paris, and he has provided more fountains and parks and squares. And this is a very massive public work programs that brought lights and air into the city. And City of London built a first public park, Victoria Park, to improve a public health, which all of this bring a very good legacy public works. So we can see that urban green spaces play an important role to transform during the pandemic. So we need to know whether is it the green spaces in the city, is it enough to accommodate people during emergency crisis. If 10% of the green area in each of the developments, housing developments, is sufficient to cater public during the crisis. Examples, what if tomorrow the second wave of COVID-19 outbreak happened? Or maybe tomorrow, if not tomorrow, maybe next month, everything will go back to the square one. We have to stay in home, trapped indoors, we'll not be able to travel very far, and we're going to stuck at home. And I need to exercise, I need to stay healthy. So I live in UK Pedana, and the nearest park that I can go is KLCC, or maybe Taman Tasik Ampang. Am I be able to go there? There might be a lot of roadblocks for this because we are not be able to travel very far. So that's the idea of 15 minutes in the city by Professor Carlos Moreno. He discovered the idea during the lockdown period, where he thinks that during the 15 minutes, during the 15 minutes, everything have to be accessible by the publics. And I might sound ambitious, but I think we should adopt the concept of 15 minutes neighborhood, where urban parks should be accessibly incorporated in every neighborhood within the 15 minutes of cycling or walking distance as a public health intervention. And we have to ensure the individual, regardless where they live, where they come from, even they are living in a flat or living in the terrace or bungalows, they have access to good urban public park, which is very important for physical and mental health. Yeah. So I think
So
the most important
the most
is the increasing of the green space in the city, and we also can do it by retrofitting the abandoned spaces, like what I have presented earlier. Yeah.
So 15 minutes accessibility to all neighborhoods, right? That's
And
the
providing
one
more
of the
green
most
spaces.
like
Providing
one
more
of the
green
most
spaces.
important green spaces initiative that we could put forward to local authority, right?
Yeah.
So landscape architect, Rita, any last words? You seem to have a lot to
Yeah.
talk.
Okay,
So any last words?
I think we need to start to establish, develop a guideline and standard for urban planners, landscape architects, and authorities. It's very critical. Like United Kingdom has done effective pandemic recovery, resilience action plans, national disaster risk management system, and we can also look on the Adopt a Park program, which is a parks adoption by the private companies, because when we have a lot of green spaces, the authorities might be not be able to maintain it because they have a lack of funds. So maybe we create a strong partnership among the local authorities, residents, and corporate agencies to adopt some of the public spaces in the city, where it can be part of the corporate social responsibility program. As what we can see at the Laman Started Chartered Kuala Lumpur by Standard Chartered, or Laman Eco Sky adopted by Eco World, which is situated at Jalan Ipoh. So maybe the governments have introduced, like there is a benefits on the tax relief for a corporate who will be able to help the local authorities to maintain the greenery parks in the city. And this is very, it's already famous in overseas, like London and New York. Even there is a Adopt a Park volunteer program by the community. Is between the residents community to beautify the public park. Not beautify, to maintain the public park together with the local authorities. So they help the city to maintain city parks by cutting the grass and keeping the parks clean. So it's very common, and I think there should be involvement by stakeholders, by the communities, to help the local authorities to maintain the green spaces in the city if the green spaces is increased. So I hope so lah. Okay, so I think other than that, maybe we have to limit the deteriorations of the deforestation. We should control the deforestations, and environmental protections measures should be done to preserve our blue-green networks in the city. I think this is something that we can think of. Yeah, that's all from me.
So one of it is to adopt a park as part of corporate social responsibility for private sector, but also one of the way to actually to do tax deduction, right?
Yes,
I think
yes,
that's
because it has been done by the Standard Chartered, by the Eco Sky, by the NASA. I heard that NASA also adopted one parks. So this is something that the developers can use to promote their properties. It can become a significant selling point to the property developments. So maybe this is something that we should think of lah in the future.
All right, all right. So I think a lot of ideas we have now. It's a matter of how we want to dwell into it. All right. So I think let's move forward to the next speaker, landscape architect Alfred. I think Dr. Julian mentioned about how to redesign urban parks for compacted areas, and landscape architect Yuta mentioned about the role of local authority, new design, new guidelines for regional planning, the 15 minutes walkability, accessibility. But you mentioned a bit different on the perspective of business and also the value chain, the interdisciplinary approach to manufacturing, and also urban farming for local people, right? So very interesting on that part because it looks more on long term. How can we harness the power of big data analytics? All right. So my first question is, you mentioned about digitalization or adoption of technology. So what are the challenges for businesses to do transition in such model?
So I think the main challenges, like as with like any like a sudden paradigm switch in the whole industry and how they approach their businesses. So um, it's just like always like we start with some resistance because I think that it's actually not easy to so quickly have to that we have to actually ease into a digitalization because like we are talking about there's like a big financial commitment that's like involving, and I think apart from that it's also like because of like the resources that you have, because some of the technology they are actually pretty new, and some of them they are actually in their infancy stage. So the amount of like the skilled worker or like people who are able to actually train subsequently whoever who adopted the digitalization. So they may not, you may not have like enough people to actually do the training at the moment. But I think that this is actually a short-term like issue and like a short-term things that we can overcome in the future. But I mean like it's not something that we can actually solve it overnight. And of course, then as with like any things that's like started like very early, there's always like a monopoly in terms of like the choices that you have. So at the end of the day, then you may end up like with like very limited choices when you wanted to do digitalization. For example, if you wanted to adopt like Beam, which I know that is also something that we've been talking a lot about in Malaysia right now. So in Singapore, it's actually something that's already started about 5 to 6 years ago, and now Beam submission is actually a mandatory requirement when for all the architects to submit their building plans. They have to actually submit a Beam model to the authority for assessment as well. So it's really like the enforcement of some of this thing. And then, of course, like, I think the government have to see that there's a lot of advantages because digitalization will definitely help to solve some of the issue, reliance on like foreign labor and cutting short a lot of time in terms of like coordination. So those are the good things to the industry. So on the other hand, I think that because it's good, so maybe the authority could really consider incentivizing businesses who are willing to actually transition into digitalization. So that's actually something quite important.
All right, on that beam part, I believe Malaysia is still progressing, and one of the strategy that government put forward in 2020, 2023, we will implement a national beam e-submission in all local authority, right? So
Yeah.
we're looking forward on that part. But when we talk about digitalization and digitizing the value chain of our profession, we need to consider the resources, the capital
Yes.
investment, and also the human labor, and also the learning curve that we will take. It will take quite
Exactly.
some time. Yes. Well, I think that is something that we need to think of lah. If you want to
Yes.
venture more, or want to do transition into this digitalization models. But
Yes.
let's tone down the idea to into urban farming. You mentioned about
Yeah.
urban farming. I think
Yeah.
it's very interesting, but in a compact countries or in a compact residential area on urban farming, how practical it is to do at home.
So I think at home itself, like might be, I think for the short term, yes. So like when we have COVID-19 pandemic, when everyone is like at home, you have nothing to do, then of course like if for example you have like one of these like home like the DIY like home growing farming kit at your home, is actually pretty easy to actually for you to do like farming, and then and you can actually harvest your own farm. So, but if we look at long terms, like I mean, sooner or later, hopefully, I mean, we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel soon, and people may actually go back to work. So, and because of that, and I just liken this to, let's say, for example, a bread making machine. So, like how often you would use it. So, if you are going to like do your own bread every day, so you would do it. But I don't foresee this thing is going to be long terms. But I think it's sort of like help you with the short term needs. But I think that one of the emphasis it would then be like community farming and urban farming. So why I think that these two things is actually important is like definitely achievable, not just because like for example in the example of Singapore is like a very dense country. So then maybe we also ask ourselves, so why do we need it, to do it in like country like Malaysia where we actually have a lot of land? So I guess the point is actually not about whether you it's like scarcity of land, whether you have like places to do it or not. So I think the point is also about like tackling world, the climate change issue. So it's like what I say, if you are able to cut short the time from farm to table, so you actually cut down a lot of like the carbon footprint that left along the way. So if you are able to say within like certain neighborhood, certain district, there is like a centralized area that like where urban farming is actually possible or community farming is actually possible, that people could actually like do more of that, and then rely less on like clearing new land for farming, and that's actually something good for the environment. So that's how I felt that it's actually quite important. Yeah.
I think if we can relate back the urban farming in terms of the pandemic situation, we can also have the food on the table as soon as possible, because it's
That's exactly
accessible
right.
within our home and in our community, rather than we need to go somewhere else a bit far, and also in long term, produce more carbon. Right. I think we have a lot of ideas now for us to digest, right? I think, and then so we have come to the end of our session. I would like to thank you all for having us today, and we hope that within this very limited time window of time, you have gained some valuable insight on how we can live in the post-pandemic era by reviewing and adaptive measures, prioritization of resilient action plans within the context of landscape architecture. After all, we are all in this together. Now, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone. Bye.
Bye.